In this lesson, we'll take a look at the vertebrate branch of the tree of life. We're going to use a diagram made by Ernst Haeckel in 1910, and while it's dated, it does illustrate major features in vertebrate evolution, so I made a copy of it, and we'll see this throughout the lesson. But first, a recap of Darwin's understanding of species origin. Darwin claims and argues that new species emerge from nearby pre-existing species, much like new children emerge from nearby pre-existing parents. So just as parents can have children and those children can have children, so too a species can split into daughter species, and each of those species can give rise to new species as well. Now, how might this happen? Here's a simplified version of what Darwin thinks is going on. Imagine a population of one species of insects in this case. Some of them move into a leafy environment. Others of that same species move into an environment with more sticks. Now, there might be predators in both environments, and then Darwin argues that this process called natural selection is going to cause the evolution of new adaptations in these separated populations. But because the environments are different, we will get different results. In the leafy environment, we're going to get leaf-like bodies evolving for better camouflage. But in the stick-like environment, we'll get stick-like bodies evolving for camouflage. So notice then the different environments change the populations in different ways. Darwin argues that natural selection has the power to make two species from one. So when we see this big tree over here on the left, whenever it's branching, one branch splits into two, we want to think of this process of an ancestral species splitting into two. Very often because some members of the ancestral species get themselves into a new environment with different characteristics, and natural selection leads to the evolution of different adaptations. So an evolutionary tree illustrates the emergence of new species over time and how species are related by common ancestry. In this lesson, we're going to focus on the vertebrates, and there are 5 major classes of vertebrates: the fish, the amphibians, the reptiles, the mammals, and the birds. And these groups are all vertebrates because they have a backbone. And so if we take a look at the vertebrate branch on the tree of life, it looks something like this. Up top, we have the currently existing vertebrates, and so the tips of the branches of the tree are currently existing species. And notice the dimension of time going down the y-axis here in millions of years. Notice that for all of these vertebrates alive today, if we go down the tree, we're going back in time. All of these vertebrates existing today have a common ancestor at this time in the past, and that common ancestor was the first vertebrates on Earth, and they were fish. Now today, there are tens of thousands of vertebrates. Here we see some estimates of the number of vertebrates, over 30,000 fish species, for example. But again, all of them emerged over time from a single common ancestor, vertebrate species of fish. Now, how do we know about the history of vertebrates? Well, the fossil record tells a pretty clear story all around the world. In sedimentary rocks of the proper age, we see this pattern in the fossil record of vertebrates. Fish are in the oldest rocks. And then in younger rocks, we have fish and amphibians. And then reptiles emerge, and then mammals and birds. Birds are the youngest vertebrate group. So clearly, new vertebrate groups have evolved over time. How much time are we talking about? Something like 500 million years. This is deep time. Deep time just refers to lengths of time that are just unimaginable, really hard for us to intuitively grasp. But it's time enough for an evolutionary process to multiply species and generate diverse vertebrate body plans and adaptations. Now, if fish were the first vertebrates, where did fish come from? And we can learn about their ancestors in places like this. These are the Canadian Rockies. And on this hillside, there's a very famous fossil deposit called the Burgess Shale Fossil Site, named after Mount Burgess, a nearby mountain. And in 1909, Charles Walcott studied this region and made his first discoveries in these rocks. The fossils found in these rocks are some 520 million years old. So we're talking about the Cambrian period, the ancient oceans prior to the first vertebrates. Here are some of the example fossil organisms found. You might notice a familiar shape here. That's a trilobite. Here's an artist's rendering of what some of these creatures look like. Here's our trilobite up there, and this is Anomalocaris, thought to be one of the dominant predators of the age. So we want to think about the vertebrate branch of the tree of life as having roots in an age when there were no vertebrates, the Cambrian oceans, 520 million years ago. And here's what the oceans might have looked like. Here's Anomalocaris maybe pursuing its prey, a trilobite, and we've got sponges and plants and other creatures as well. So somewhere at this time there was some species that was the direct ancestor of the first fish. But who was it? Scientists suspect it was a creature like this, Pikaia. Now up top we see some of the fossils of Pikaia, and we can get a sense of its size by looking down here. The actual size of Pikaia relative to a human, it was a tiny creature, but it had a huge potential. It had a head with two forward-facing eyes. It had a rod-like structure running the length of the back, a flexible nerve that runs down the length of the body, had segmented blocks of muscle. So this creature, while small, it seemed to be an efficient swimmer, and perhaps that's what gave it success in evading predators. So the idea is that notochord was the precursor to the backbone. And while Pikaia itself was not a vertebrate, its descendant would be the first vertebrate, a fish with a backbone. So whether it's Pikaia or a species similar to Pikaia, we're talking about the evolution of the backbone at this period of time in the Cambrian oceans. Now, once the first vertebrate fish species evolved, evidently it was a very successful body plan because we have a lot of new species emerging. So we get the diversification. Again, one species splitting into two and two into four, etc. Now, why does this kind of thing happen? Again, the idea is as one species spreads out into different environments, the separated populations can evolve different adaptations and become different species. We might say then this was the age of fish. They were the first vertebrates and they dominated the oceans. Now, notice this branch here. There was a very interesting evolutionary experiment going on in freshwater habitats, the evolution of lungs and limbs. And this would permit vertebrates to move onto land. Now, this transition from fish to amphibians, the fossil record indicates, took something like 15 million years. Now, we get a nice glimpse of this transition with a creature like Tiktaalik. Here we see a reconstruction of what scientists think Tiktaalik looked like, and here is a replica of the actual fossil bones found in the rocks. Tiktaalik had characteristics like a fish and characteristics like an amphibian, and that's what makes it a transitional species. So the fish-like traits were gills and scales and fin rays, and the amphibian-like traits were a flat head, eyes on the top of the head, a neck that allowed the head to move, a rib cage with primitive lungs, fin bones resembling later vertebrate limbs. So Tiktaalik is a transitional species, exactly what you would predict if a fish species was evolving into the first amphibian. In this diagram, we see the transition from fish through Tiktaalik to a primitive amphibian. The fish has bones in its fin here, but if we take a look at the bones in Tiktaalik, we're starting to see that familiar one bone, two bone pattern that we will see in vertebrate limbs. And then down here in the primitive amphibian, we definitely have the one bone, two bone, and now we have the evolution of digits. So this transformation took something like 15 million years, but it gave Tiktaalik new opportunities. So we can ask the question, well, what was the advantage to having these limbs, allowing it to crawl outside the water onto the land? Well, Tiktaalik would have found new food sources, small creatures like spiders, insects, scorpions, and it may have also eaten plants as well. And escaping predators was another benefit to moving onto land. So this type of creature would have been the ancestor of all future land vertebrates. And of course, some of those vertebrates went back to live in the oceans like the whales. Tiktaalik had a bright future. All right, so let's return to our tree. We have the transition to land. Vertebrates are moving onto land with the first tetrapod amphibians. Now, evidently, This amphibian body plan, the adaptations suitable for life on land, that was a successful body plan as well, because we get a lot of diversification of amphibian species at this time. So again, how does one species turn into multiple species? Members of one species spread out into different environments, and then natural selection will favor different adaptations to suit those different environmental demands. So we get lots of new amphibian species evolving here, but all of them had to live in wet environments. They couldn't live too far away from water. They needed to keep their skin moist and had to reproduce in water as well. So amphibians were limited in their range. They were successful, they dominated the land, but they were limited in their range. This was the age of amphibians. But there would be a newcomer emerging onto the scene. For one of those amphibian species shown here branching off of the rest of the amphibians here, that amphibian species would be the ancestor to reptiles. So in reptiles, what we have is the evolution of new traits, new characteristics, new adaptations to allow for a full-time lifestyle on dry land. The amniotic egg, so this is a shelled egg that allows the reptiles to reproduce outside of water, and then the dry scaly skin allows for water conservation. So reptiles could expand their range. And then later we have the branching off of the mammal ancestor from the rest of the reptile part of the tree. And at this point, around 250 million years ago, there was a catastrophic event. You might see the effect of it here. So the amphibian part of the tree gets kind of trimmed a little bit here. And what was this event? It was a mass extinction event. About 250 million years ago, scientists think there was a tremendous amount of volcanic activity over the surface of the planet. And this released all kinds of gases into the atmosphere, changing the climate and acidifying the oceans. So many species on land and in the oceans went extinct. But evidently, some of those surviving reptile species found lots of opportunities. So we get the multiplication of species after this mass extinction event. Notice the lots of the branching here. And we could therefore say the success of the reptiles during this period of time, we can call this the age of the reptiles, including their cousins, the dinosaurs. And we see that split here, where dinosaurs emerge from reptilian ancestors. And of course, we know that some of those dinosaur species were evolving feathers and wings. And Archaeopteryx is a fascinating creature that captures this transition. It is a transitional species between dinosaur and bird. Up here in the top left, we see the wing bones of Archaeopteryx, and we see the impressions of the feathers. Over here, if we look at the skull, we see teeth, and then we have a tailbone here. Well, wings and feathers are characteristics of birds, the future vertebrate group. Teeth and tailbones are characteristics of dinosaurs, the ancestral group. So with Archaeopteryx, then, we have a glimpse into the transition from dinosaur to bird. Now, 65 million years ago, we've probably all heard about this, there was another mass extinction event, an asteroid impact. And notice again, we're going to get some of the trimming of the tree. A lot of the dinosaurs went extinct. But some of those feathered dinosaurs, small feathered dinosaurs, survived, and they would be the ancestors of the modern birds. Now let's return to the mammal story. So the mammal ancestor splits from the reptiles. And then we have the evolution of the production of milk in the mammary glands, and this, of course, is an adaptation to nourish offspring, and fur, and this would be an adaptation for inhabiting cooler climates. So mammals could expand their range beyond reptiles. We get the evolution of the placenta, so we have live birth, and that brings us up to the 65 million year mass extinction event, the asteroid impact. Now notice, prior to the asteroid, Again, it was the age of reptiles and dinosaurs. Dinosaurs dominated the daytime ecosystem. Mammals were small creatures and nocturnal, and they were living in the shadows of the dinosaurs. But with the asteroid and with the extinction of many of those dinosaurs, it gave mammals new opportunities. So new niches opened up. A niche is a way of life of a species. What does it eat? What eats it? How does it get resources? How does it live in its environment? Well, the dinosaurs were dominating. Mammals were kind of small, nocturnal. Now the dinosaurs, a lot of them are gone, and mammals have some new opportunities. So it's after the asteroid impact that we start to see the branching of the mammal part of the tree. We get mammal diversification, lots of new mammals evolving. We could call this the age of mammals. One of those mammal branches was the primate branch. And here we see the primates. These are the different groups of primates today. They all had a common ancestor, a shrew-like creature. This would be the ancestor of all primates living today. Of course, apes are an interesting group for us because we are on this part of the tree. Here we have the orangutan, the gorilla, the human, the bonobo, and the chimp. Notice bonobos and chimps very similar, lots of similar characteristics because they had a recent common ancestor. Now, the chimps and bonobos are our closest relatives, so we are most similar to them. It's just that we're not as similar to them as they are to each other. Now, why would that be? Because we have a more distant common ancestor with the bonobos and chimps. Now, if indeed our species evolved from an ape-like ancestor, then we would predict that the fossil record would capture some kind of transitional species along the way to the evolution of modern humans. Is there such a transitional species? Yes. These are the bones of Lucy. And Lucy is exactly what we would predict if an ape-like species was evolving into modern humans. Lucy's bones, here they are over here on the left, and here's a reconstruction of her on the right here. Lucy has a pelvis and leg bones and feet that were adapted for bipedal locomotion like a human. Apes are knuckle walkers. They walk on all fours. They can, for a time, walk on two legs, but they're not well adapted for that kind of locomotion. So Lucy is showing a modern human characteristic in her form of locomotion. But like apes, Lucy had a small brain and long arms and short legs and other ape-like characteristics as well. So Lucy is a great example of a transitional species, just what we would predict if in fact apes were evolving into humans. So that mass extinction event 65 million years ago gave mammals new opportunities. And it was on one branch of the mammal tree, the primate branch, that we really see the impressive evolution of larger and larger brains, leading to our species, unmatched in the animal kingdom for our level of intelligence, our capacity to communicate with language and put our brains together to solve problems. We really are an impressive species. We might in fact say we are living in the age of humans. But we should note, importantly, that humans were not destined to sprout from this tree. There were historical and chance events that could have been different. Let's reconsider that mass extinction event, the asteroid impact. You'll recall it trimmed the tree. Lots of the dinosaurs went extinct. And when species go extinct, new ways of life open up for the surviving species, and that's why we said the mammals were able to take advantage of that opportunity, and we get the diversification of mammals, including that primate branch. But we have to ask the question, what if the asteroid didn't hit? Would it be that the dinosaurs would still dominate those ecosystems? It may well have been that the primates never would have evolved. So for modern biologists, then, the evolution of humans is just like the evolution of all the other vertebrates on this tree here, that these are historical events. Things could have been different. The evolution on planet Earth was not destined to lead to our type of species. So we'll finish with this question then. Why did new vertebrate groups evolve over time? And here we want to think about the idea that vertebrates for the last 500 million years were just expanding into new environments. Starting with the first fish, the first vertebrates in the oceans. They then colonized the freshwater habitats and evolved new adaptations. And then with the evolution of lungs and limbs, we get the transition onto land. So the amphibians now can live on land, but they're still tied to the water for reproduction. But then we get the evolution of new adaptations in the reptiles. It allows them to break that connection to the water and live on dry land. But they were limited to certain habitats due to the way they regulate their body temperature. Well, then we get the evolution of adaptations that allow mammals to expand into cooler climates. And then, of course, the birds have adaptations that allow them to expand into the air. So we get the group-specific adaptations evolved to survive in new environments as vertebrates expanded across the surface of the planet over the last 500 million years. And the expansion of those vertebrates across the surface of the planet can be seen on our tree. These are the regions of where there's a lot of branches on the tree. And that indicates there were many open niches. So lots of different ways of making a living for that first species encountering a new environment. And so you tend to get species multiplication. Evolution tends to create new species to fill those empty niches. Consider the fish and the amphibians. They were the first to explore many of the open niches available. So that first species of vertebrate fish had the whole ocean and all the freshwater rivers and lakes and streams to explore, and we get species diversification. The first amphibians, the tetrapods that moved on to land, they had all of those land environments to explore, and we get amphibian diversification. And then those two mass extinction events eliminated many species, and that allowed surviving reptiles to diversify, and then for that second mass extinction event, the surviving birds and mammals to diversify. And we, humans, are just one species of among tens of thousands of vertebrate species. But we are a very interesting and special species. We're the only ones that can tell this story. So we really are living in the age of humans. It's humans that are telling this grand, majestic story of the evolution of life on Earth, but it's also humans that are having an impact on the planet like no other species.